And the Labour leader, Sir Keir Starmer, has pulled out of a keynote speech today as pressure mounts over the so-called beergate scandal. Well, the controversy has overshadowed the local election results, but Labour has tried to paint as a victory. Let's look at the figures. Let's see how they mount up. Sir John Curtice is a polling expert and an analyst on these sort of things. Sir John, good morning to you.
Good morning to you, Eamon.
So let me ask you this. If what we know about beergate, if we knew that last Wednesday, or people knew that last Wednesday and Thursday, do you think the results would have been different in any way?
Well, maybe, but probably not. Certainly we did have some polling in advance of Thursday, which asked people both about whether or not they thought the Prime Minister had broken the rules and whether or not they thought Sir Keir Starmer had broken the rules. And certainly at that point in time, many fewer people thought that Sir Keir Starmer had broken the rules than had the Prime Minister. But of course, in a sense, the Conservatives, in urging the Durham Police to investigate once more, are of course potentially playing with fire. I mean, should it emerge that Sir Keir, in the judgment of the police, did break the rules, and as a result he resigns, the pressure on the Prime Minister to resign, particularly if he were to receive another fine, would of course be very substantial. So in a sense, yes, this for the time being put the pressure on the Labour Party and probably has caused Sir Keir not to make a speech today, but actually this could still rebound on the government if actually the judgment of the police were to be adverse for Sir Keir.
Very interesting. So I suppose what you're saying is it may well be more beneficial to both of them to let this quietly go away and do very little talking on it in the future.
Well, that might be true, except, of course, the anger that there has been amongst the public about the Prime Minister's alleged breaking of the coronavirus rules isn't something that's simply been manufactured by the Labour Party. It is something that's been very widely felt, basically because it reminds many people of various very painful sacrifices that they made during the lockdown, like not being able to attend the funeral of loved ones, not being able to hold their hand when they were dying, or to visit relatives with dementia. And certainly, one of the lessons of the local elections is that, certainly Partygate is at least one of the contributing factors as to why, for the first time since December 2019, the government is in somewhat electorally choppy waters and certainly is behind the Labour Party. We can certainly argue that the Labour Party's performance was not particularly dramatic, but the Conservative support was well down on 12 months ago. It's roughly in line with the evidence of the opinion polls that the party has suffered a fair loss of support, and Partygate is at least a part of that story.
All of us in the media, we spend a lot of time talking about the Conservatives and Labour, more time than we spend talking about the Lib Dems. Should we be talking about the Lib Dems now?
Perhaps. The local election performance by Liberal Democrats was the best one that they've achieved since 2010, apart from the local elections of 2019, which took place in the midst of Theresa May's increasingly failing attempt to get her party to agree to the deal with the European Union that she'd negotiated over Brexit. And the Liberal Democrats were attracting voters because of their promise of a second referendum. They don't have those circumstances now, but even so, they did succeed in making a couple of point advance on last year. And two particularly interesting features of it that might perhaps worry Conservative MPs. One is the Liberal Democrat vote was rising just as much in pro-Leave areas as it was in pro-Remain areas, despite the party's past association with the Remain cause. And secondly, the Liberal Democrat vote arose above all in wards where they were starting off in second place to the Conservatives, particularly in the southern half of England, particularly in rural constituencies. In other words, just in very much prime Tory territory. So I think certainly what the Liberal Democrats may now be on the cusp of achieving is basically regaining their old role as the principal party of protest, particularly in mid-term. They're still not back to the levels of strength that they had before 2010, but maybe they do now have a platform from which to begin once more to occasionally make waves in the media, and therefore, as a result, perhaps to begin to pick up a measure, at least, of electoral support.
We're in rife coalition country, aren't we, really, after these elections, or we could be, because under Keir Starmer, Labour haven't progressed anything more than Jeremy Corbyn had brought them, and the Lib Dems are on the rise. So, maybe it's time for a flirtation.
Well, there is no doubt that both the polls and these local elections point to the prospect of a hung parliament. The chances of a hung parliament after the next election are pretty high. And of course, what we also then have to bear in mind is that there aren't any parties in the House of Commons at present who will be willing to help to sustain a minority Conservative administration. So in the event of a hung parliament, it's going to be much easier for Sir Keir to form an administration than it will be for Boris Johnson. But that said, there is potentially a very substantial price and difficult shoals for Labour to negotiate in those situations. The Liberal Democrats, if they can take Labour over the line, they will want progress towards proportional representation. That's a pretty fundamental change to our constitution. But of course, the larger third party at the moment, and perhaps still will be after the next election, is the Scottish National Party. And their price will be some kind of referendum on Scotland's constitutional status in which independence is an option. And that, of course, also has important implications for the future of British politics. So there is no doubt that if Labour can't win an overall majority, but the Conservative popularity, we may be in for very, very interesting times in the wake of the next general election.